You're listening to episode 63 of Darker Days Radio. Welcome, World of Darkness fans, to another episode of Darker Days Radio. I am one of your hosts, Adrian, and joining me on the mics tonight are...
Hi, this is Beckett for Darker Days Radio.
And this is Mark. Good to be back, folks.
Welcome aboard to the episode, and I'm looking forward to the discussion tonight where we're going to cover things like the Midnight Circus sourcebook, and we're also going to be taking a look in the secret frequency at cargo cults and how you might use those in your game. But before we start off, I'm sure that we've all been up to exciting things gaming-wise, so I thought that I'd start with you, Beckett. What you been up to?
Honestly, for the last month and a half, absolutely nothing. Nothing game-related at all. My group's been on hold just because of, work. All until last night where we had our first game. Most of the people being back. There was a Pathfinder Society game. We ran something it's a series called the Black Rose Museum, which basically the players go into this haunted museum and mess around or as is more true the case, get messed around with. And it was fun. It was interesting. A couple brand new players, a little glimmer of hope that one of them might actually run World of Darkness for me.
Oh, very cool.
That will be, I may have mentioned this before. I've actually never played World of Darkness. I've always run it. I'm actually very excited about that. And then,
That's a real treat.
Of course, I'll have to wait at least another month because I'm about to be gone for work as well. So now that I've got that little glimmer of hope, I have the temptation of having to wait for it to actually maybe become true.
That's something to look forward to. Are you running this at a local gaming store with it being Pathfinder Society?
Sometimes we do. Sometimes I do it at my house because we have two kids, and sometimes my wife likes to jump in as well. If it's World of Darkness, she's always in. Yeah. Sometimes she just likes to. She's not really a fan of fantasy and Pathfinder Society or Dungeons and Dragons, but sometimes she just likes to jump into something to do. And
Pathfinder can be quite a handful as a system.
Mm-hmm. Well, with Pathfinder Society specifically, kind of the way it's designed is each game, each scenario is meant to be played in a 3 to 6 hour block, just depending on the group. And it's kind of like a single, it's got a beginning, middle, and end, a conclusion. So the entire session is one adventure that that is completed, and they're not really attached to each other at all. Sometimes there's some bleed over. Like I mentioned, the Black Rose Museum, there's actually 5 of them that all take place in the same location with reoccurring NPCs, but they're not. You don't have to have played any of the previous ones to jump into it.
But it's kind of cool if you have.
It is.
Yeah, nice.
Especially just because so many different nightmarish kind of outbreaks happen in that location.
Yeah. I've run a fair bit of Pathfinder, but I haven't actually touched it for a year or two. It's just been all World of Darkness recently. Yeah. Mm. That's good fun. Yeah.
I wish it was all World of Darkness.
So you're basically saying you're playing Pathfinder, but you're thinking about the old World of Darkness.
I am. One day, the group that about 2 months ago, we'd started out playing Vampire the Masquerade. Most of them are back now, so we can actually jump back into that soon. And I know a couple of people are really looking forward to it. They really enjoyed what happened so far, and they definitely want it to continue, kind of see how it plays out.
You posted on the forums a little while ago that you had an introductory session of Vampire the Masquerade. Is this for that same group, or is this something else?
Yeah, it's the same group. It's just we haven't been able to play since that original one. Yeah. And it's something I just kind of made up. It's both an introduction to the World of Darkness and also to Vampire the Masquerade. So the idea is it's similar to a couple of the early published adventures like Ash to Ash, and another one I just picked up wasn't actually White Wolf. It was like a third-party published book for Vampire the Masquerade called Blood Nativity. That's what it is.
Oh, right. Wow. Cool.
And in both cases, it's like okay, you wake up and you're a vampire. There's a little bit beforehand, but the idea is that you kind of explore the world and also being, a vampire. And you could easily, switch this to, you wake up and all of a sudden you're an awakened mage or a changeling, or you died last night. Now you're a wraith. And it's kind of, the whole point is to kind of explore the world as you go and kind of learn. So everything's kind of like, it's got like a slight fog of war. And as you play, you kind of expand, what your characters know and can perceive around you.
Cool.
With that Blood Nativity, it was produced under a special license with Atlas Games.
Mm-hmm.
Bit strange in that.
Yeah, I wasn't clear. Was that actually... I know it wasn't published by White Wolf or Onyx Path now, but I wasn't sure if that was like an official adventure or if it was something else somebody wrote that was just that well done, or...
I don't know the actual history behind it, because just in the front cover of the book it actually just says produced under special license by Atlas Games, and the product code is actually an AG product code rather than a WW. So if you look at the complete list, there's a PDF that White Wolf produced nearing the end of the run of World of Darkness. It acts as a complete checklist, or if you're like me, a shopping list of all of the old World of Darkness books, and Blood Nativity does not show up on that list.
No.
Oh, wow. I remember it was some years back. It was still White Wolf days, and it was still when they were publishing, like the second edition and revised era, they had a checklist. And I remember seeing that, and it was like the one book I had never, ever seen before. And I kept looking. This is back before Google and internet was really not very searchable. So I kept trying to find a reference to this book, and I could never find it. And then about 3 months ago, I noticed it popped up on Drive-Thru RPG.
Oh, okay.
So I picked it up, and it was literally the first time I've ever actually seen this book.
Well, it was published in 1991, so we're talking very early in the run.
Wow. Okay. Wow. Right. So that's pre-Werewolf even.
Yep. Very much so.
I'll have to check that out. It's in print, is it?
I don't know if it's in print because I got the PDF. I want to say that because, as far as I know, it just kind of appeared. I want to say they would probably put it on print on demand, but it's only like 20 or 30 pages or so.
Yeah, I'll give that a look.
I'm taking a look at my copy here. It's 16 pages.
Okay.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
okay.
And it's got that really, really old school art. Kind of the defining original World of Darkness art, which I liked. I don't mean that as a bad thing. It's pretty distinct.
All right.
The cover itself is black and white.
Yes, and features the Sunset Club.
Lovely.
But don't judge it by that. So what about yourself, Mark? What have you been up to?
Surprisingly mage, and more mage, and also a little bit of mage. We've had trouble over the last couple of years with my table talk group here getting scheduling, so I was able to rally my old face-to-face group from back when I lived in the Netherlands, and we're scattered across the world, LA, Tel Aviv, and one other guy's in England, other guys in Geneva. But through the magic of Skype and more recently Google Video Hangouts, we've resurrected our old mage game from the late 90s, early 2000s, and that's been going strong now for 4 years, entirely online. The Chronicle itself is going to be 20 years old this year.
Wow.
We started actually, well, there's been a few hiatuses down the line, but we've got a great momentum going now. The Chronicle started actually on the 50th anniversary of the Hiroshima bombing, and there was all these kind of tie-ins with the Angel of the Atomic Fire and stuff. So I've got these delusional ideas about trying to wrap up the current arc on what would be the 70th anniversary later this year. So I'm kind of driving the players hard, cracking the whip, and we have to get another session in this month or we're not going to meet the deadline. And they've very selfishly gone away and had small children and stuff. So that's making it harder than usual. But the game's going well. I know, priorities. Yeah, mine are of the age where I can say, don't come in the room for the next 6 hours, but, their little ones need feeding. So there you go. But no, it's enjoyable. It's going well, and technology has fallen into place to kind of help us along. Music's an important part of the games for me. So having streaming services like Grooveshark and what have you, where you can broadcast to your listeners, and then everybody hears the same thing at the same time, and mixing that with with the visuals of the video hangout and programs like CoSketch if we need to. Really makes it as close to a tabletop as you can get. I know there are bespoke virtual tabletop solutions out there, but we've kind of cobbled together 3 or 4 applications and have all those running at once. And initially it was just voice over Skype, but as British internet has moved from the Steam age into the digital age, it makes it easier to run things more comprehensively at my end. So yeah, that's going nicely. It's going well.
I think that it's remarkably impressive that you started running Mage the Ascension at age 10.
Yeah.
Oh dear. Yes. I'm starting to feel that the same, meeting up with a couple of guys that I used to game with and their wives who I hadn't met before, and they said, "Oh, so how long have you known my husband?" I said, "Oh, well, on and off for it would now be 23 years." "Oh, okay, right." So, and you suddenly think, where did that time go?
Wasted it mostly on Mage, as far as I can tell.
There is no such thing as wasting it on Mage.
That's probably true, yeah. So also tons of console gaming with my kids, actually. It's been lots of fun too.
Anything in particular?
Borderlands, yeah. Large amounts of Borderlands. I also bought the new Alien Isolation game, and my copy is, like so many people's copies, glitched, so I'm a bit stuck in that now. But yeah, up to the point that I got, it was an extremely good game, and then it stopped working. That's kind of frustrating. But if we're looking online, that's apparently an issue with that game. There's more glitches than monsters in that thing.
That's a bit of a worry.
It's a shame, yeah. And you go online and you see half a dozen people with the same issue as you do, and you think, oh great, so this is never going to get fixed. But up to where I got, which is about 40% of the way through the game, it is a fantastic game. And I think if you're a PC gamer, a lot of the issues have been patched. But if you're stuck playing an old Xbox 360 like I am, you're kind of out of luck. So it will remain an unfinished epic, I think, as far as I'm concerned.
Massive shame.
Yeah. And what about you, Adrian?
The last month has been a bit of a resurgence for me because I've spent the last 4 years with no gaming group whatsoever, not getting an awful lot of gaming in whatsoever. Over the last probably 4 to 6 weeks, I've signed over vast amounts of my paycheck to Fantasy Flight Games. I'm thinking of just doing a direct deposit into their bank account every month. It'll work out much easier because at the moment I've been able to get in some games of X-Wing and doing the living card game thing at the moment. So I've got Lord of the Rings, Android Netrunner, and the Star Wars living card game, all of which are absolutely fantastic. I got into the Lord of the Rings one because it actually has got a solitaire mode as well as up to 4 players, and it's actually a true cooperative game.
Wow. Interesting.
So you actually play against the deck and against the quest, but you do so in a truly cooperative fashion. So when you build your decks, you decide which heroes you're going to take, and you can only take one version of a hero at the table. So you can all fight over who gets Aragorn. Basically, after that, you're all working together in order to successfully do the quest and kill all of the monsters and get to the end. And there's a scoring system. So as a team, you can be working to work your way through the quest fairly quickly, and then you can play again and try and beat your old points.
Cool. And the solitaire version works well?
Works very well. I played it solitaire for about a month before I started playing it with other people. What this offers, at least in my perspective, is that if I just feel like having a game, I can sit down and probably about 40 minutes for myself. I can crank through a game, but it also allows you to test out your decks against the quest before you actually meet up with other people. So you agree on a quest, and then you could say, okay, well, I'm going to tweak my deck this way, and then you can have almost like a run through and see how things go.
Very cool. So how does a living card game differ from a standard collectible card game, would you say?
There's a lot of differences, but really the main difference is the distribution model. For those of us who are accustomed to playing Magic the Gathering and those sorts of games, every time a new expansion comes out, you buy it as booster packs and you get randomized cards. So, of course, you get varying rarities and eBay inflation and all of those sorts of things. With a living card game, they will release a combination of deluxe expansions after the core set and then also an adventure path. So a deluxe expansion is a big set that usually has about 160 cards. You buy the deluxe expansion and you have everything that you need. There's no randomization, you just buy it. And then there
Right.
are 60 card adventure paths, which are meant to come out about every 6 to 8 weeks. And there are 6 of those in a story. So basically what you can do is go out, buy a deluxe expansion, and then buy your 6 adventure packs for a cycle, and you own all the cards. You don't have to go chasing any down.
That's fantastic.
In terms of the pricing, it actually works out, it's very affordable. So, I mean, I pay for an adventure pack roughly the same as what I would pay for 3 boosters of Magic.
Okay, wow. That's really good.
And I know ahead of schedule exactly what cards I'm getting. I know the quantities, and I know whether or not I want to buy the pack.
Yeah, that would have been handy back in the day when Magic the Gathering was at its height. I ran the game section of a bookstore, and you got 50% staff discount, and that still didn't help.
No, definitely wouldn't have.
No, it just made it worse.
The other thing was, last weekend I started with a brand new group, and I'm running Vampire the Masquerade.
Oh, congratulations.
So
How's it going?
It's not going too badly. The players got together for the first session and made characters, and then we got together and actually ran the very first gaming session. I thought it went fairly well. They're all playing fairly cautiously because they've realized how vulnerable their vampires are. I'm actually running the Forged in Steel module, so we're starting with the one. I'm running a prelude, and then we'll move on to the one in the back of the Vampire the Masquerade 2nd edition, and then work our way through the Chicago Chronicles after that.
Didn't you say that I think 2 of your players were completely brand new?
2 of my players are from my old gaming group, and then one of them is brand new to the gaming group and has never played World of Darkness before.
Wonderful.
Sorry, Mark, you had a question?
Yeah, I was just going to say that's the Gary, Indiana thing, right?
Yeah, that's right. So I'm kind of playing, really playing up the urban decay, especially taking my visual cues from the movie Only Lovers Left Alive.
Yes, I just about to mention that. Yes, perfect.
Yeah, and that's working really well. And the beginning of the game has basically centered around the possibility that one of the local vampires is straying out of their feeding grounds and is feeding on people who are coming out of the local blood donation bank.
Nice. And are you using revised, or what iteration of the rules? V20 or?
2nd edition.
2nd edition. Okay, right, cool.
I don't own 1st edition, so I figured that I would run it with the next closest thing to the rule set when the game first came out.
Yeah. Well, this of all the various editions, I think the difference between Vampire 1st and Vampire 2nd is the biggest. Vampire 1st has got some really abstracted ways of doing things. Its combat system is really just a couple of opposed roles. It kind of became a lot more codified in later versions, but I've got a big soft spot for Vampire 1st, but 2nd edition's that's a fine rule set.
No pun intended, but 2nd edition was the one I cut my teeth on, so it holds a very special place in my heart. I'll go back to 2nd edition every time. Okay, guys, I think that it's time now that we go into the World of Darkness news. Taking a quick look at the Onyx Path publishing site, the main one that I want to draw everyone's attention to, and it should be no great surprise, is a post from Matt McFarland, which is saying that they are starting work on the development for Changeling 20th Anniversary Edition. He put that out in a post in early March, and when a few people asked some fairly pointed questions like, are you the developer, and is work starting, he answered yes. So we have Matt McFarland as the developer for Changeling 20, and hopefully we'll be seeing something else coming out of this very soon.
Yeah, that's fantastic news. And he announced it with a Shakespeare quote, if I recall correctly. So
he most certainly did.
Yeah,
which is how one does things with Changeling.
Yes.
The other news include that if you're a big fan of the classic cover art of the World of Darkness, it is now possible to get a lot of them on T-shirts. So, for example, if you wanted the front cover of Book of the Worm 2nd edition, or Khan's Places of Power, or even Horizon Stronghold of Hope, Initiates of the Art, or Technomancer's Toy Box, then you'll be able to get all of these on a T-shirt from here. So what I'll do is put a link to that in the show notes. If you want to take a look at the Onyx Path's Redbubble store, you'll find all of those T-shirts there.
There was a post a couple of weeks before that with some T-shirt designs that had the craft symbols for Mage the Ascension, and this was a big thrill to Mage fans because it kind of served as a preview of symbols that are going to be shown in Mage 20. Some of these crafts didn't actually have symbols before, so the first place you get to see them is on a T-shirt design, which is really exciting.
Interesting. I know on Drive-Thru also it's not T-shirts, but it's kind of related. They've been doing a lot of posters recently. The last 2 weeks or so, and they kind of range from everything, both classic and New World of Darkness. And
I haven't got any of those yet. I'd like to see what the quality is.
I was thinking the same thing. They look cheaper than even like the shipping cost for the physical product might be, but the one for Boston for the new Mage, that one looked pretty interesting. Something you might
That's a cool image. Yeah, that's a cool image.
A lot of them look really nice, and I thought it was just interesting because all of a sudden it seems like they were just popping up out of nowhere, and there's a lot of options.
Well, I know in all the Kickstarter surveys they ask what would you like to see from Onyx Path, and I've always typed in posters. So now that we're seeing them, that's great. That's really good.
Excellent. So obviously there's more than just you requesting posters.
Yes, yeah. I'm not trying to claim credit for it.
No, most certainly not.
That would be if that's true though, then I can think of a few more things that I would write down. But no, it's probably not just me.
I was thinking that if we've got Eddie Webb sitting over there saying, "Well, Mark wants posters, give the man posters," I have a list of things that I will pass through you.
Good.
You can pick up the special bat phone to Eddie Webb and place a couple of requests.
The wad phone.
For New World of Darkness, the release of the Fallen World Anthology in print has occurred during March as well. In this, you'll find 12 short stories, 8 which are original to this collection, and they've got a fine selection of authors. Most of the names here will not be of any surprise to people familiar with the New World of Darkness, so that's available as well through Drive-Thru RPG.
Speaking of Kickstarters, there has also been a couple of posts in recent weeks about Mage 20th with Phil Bucato nearing the end of his first kind of first review pass of it, and we've been getting little snippets of art preview. The art looks gorgeous. Looks at the layout. They posted a couple of previews of the layout on the Kickstarter page. It's been such a long time that any little bit of drip feeding sends us Mage fans into a real frenzy over that. And so hopefully we're going to see a backer PDF sometime in the next month or so. So that would be fantastic. Yes.
As of this recording, last night I received that Kickstarter email update, and I was busy at the time when I read it, so I was just scanning through. I could have swore it said the initial PDF version for the Kickstarter patrons was out, so I was spending like a minute seriously looking through looking for a link, and then I went back and reread it, and it's like, no, it'll be out soon. Damn it.
Are they going to be taking the same approach as they did for the Dark Ages Kickstarter, where they'll release the PDF to the backers and then use that as almost a quality assurance process?
Yeah, Rich Thomas said something along those lines. Yeah. Which would be nice because the open... Sorry, go on, Beckett.
I said I hope so.
Well, the open development approach for Mage has not been as open as, say, for example, Dark Ages has, or Book of the Worm has, or some of the other stuff. We haven't received, the raw text. There haven't been regular previews of some of the meaty content. Phil's posted some snippets up here and there. In fact, you can find a 60-odd page compilation of all of his various previews. But there's been very little crunch, really, a very little sight of what the actual rules are going to be. So salivating in anticipation would not be an understatement where this is concerned.
Do we have any word on whether or not the index has been completed?
Index? They don't need an index. It's only 600 pages long.
Actually, one thing I hope that they do, especially on the PDF front, is something that really, really annoyed me about the V20. I hope they break it up. So in the V20, they actually broke it up into 3 separate sections. There's the, chapter 1, chapter 2, and chapter 3. And each of them in themselves are almost, an entire book, like 200 pages. Yeah. I hope they do this with the Mage as well. They did it for the Mummy the Cursed, for the New World of Darkness. So you can actually download the 3 different sections separately as their own
nice.
PDF files.
Oh, cool.
That would be so nice, because reading on a tablet, every time I open up the V20, it takes a little while for it to load the book.
Yeah, my Werewolf my Werewolf PDF is really slow like that as well. Actually, my V20 is okay, but the Werewolf one takes ages to page through it.
So again, if you have that secret little wad bat phone out,
how I wish.
Actually, the first time the V20 came out, I was actually deployed, and the reason I came up with this idea is because it took forever to try and download that book. I was literally trying for about a day straight trying to get the book, because every time it get to around 60%, I would lose internet connection and have to start all over again.
Oh no.
The question that I've got with Vampire the Masquerade, and I can't get a confirmation here at the moment on the Drive-Thru RPG website, someone had told me that when you do the print-on-demand version of V20, it actually arrives as 2 volumes rather than just a single one, because 529 pages. Do either one of you know if that's correct?
There was the deluxe version. Initially was 2 volumes. Players in my tabletop group here had the black and white version as a single book, but I believe that the color version was 2 volumes. Now, I'm not seeing that on the Drive-Thru RPG page now, so they may have changed it so that with advancements in the printing, that the full bleed, full color deluxe version is now down to a single volume. But it used to be 2. I don't know if it still is.
Okay.
I could be wrong. I thought I had heard actually kind of the opposite, that originally it came out as 1, but so many people were complaining because it was so thick that the pages wouldn't stick. The book actually would start breaking fairly quickly just because it was so thick that they actually went to 2 separate. They broke it up into 2 separate sections. Could be wrong on that, but.
Well, then maybe there's an earlier phase, because my guys didn't order their copies until a few months in, so there could well have been an earlier kind of faulty iteration, yeah.
Okay, I think we'll throw this one out to the community, so if anyone listening knows the story behind this, please drop us a line. Right, well, I think that will wrap up the World of Darkness news for this episode.
There's one item I think we need to get to, Beckett. You noticed a release for Werewolf the Forsaken that people might want to talk about.
It's true. Actually, there was a couple I noticed recently. It's not new, but the God Machine Chronicles for the New World of Darkness just went. It's probably over now, but they dropped the price on it for, I think it was like Dungeon Masters Week or something. So I picked that up. It was actually really cheap for the time. It's probably over now. And then, like you said, Werewolf 2nd Edition has finally come up, which also probably means, in relation to the Mage the Ascension, Mage 2nd Edition may be coming out too soon.
Mage the Awakening.
No, I mean, for Mage the Ascension, you were mentioning that, the M20.
Oh, right.
I'm thinking Mage 2nd Edition may come out fairly at the same time. Maybe. I haven't heard anything official, but just speculation. As far as Forsaken 2nd Edition, it looks like the pre-errata version, like we were talking about with the Dark Ages 20, where they have a pre-version so people can kind of look it over, catch any errors. That's come out. Not only backers can buy it, it's actually open to everybody, I believe. It looks like this, as well as kind of introducing the new updates from the God Machine Chronicles to the new system mechanics and rules. They've also included from the original Werewolf Forsaken, the Indigo Chronicles, which kind of gives the game a bit of focus. One of the complaints of the original Werewolf the Forsaken was that it was a really interesting read, and it had a lot of material in there, a lot of hooks. Or actually not a lot of hooks. It had a lot of beautiful mechanics. It kind of filled out the world a lot. But after one read the whole book, there was kind of this idea of okay, now I've read it, now what? what do I do with this? The Indigo Chronicles kind of introduce a little bit of a story.
Well, the Imogen Chronicles sound like an interesting approach to the game. One of the things I've been reading is that a couple of the fans who've been looking through the second edition have been saying that some people find it almost too positive, that a lot of the traits that they thought made the Forsaken actually Forsaken are less prevalent in the game, and that is more of a heroic slant to it. But I haven't seen the Imogen Chronicles yet, so I can't speak to that personally.
Oh, dear.
I don't know how to pronounce it either.
For those of you at home who are wondering why we're laughing, when we put together the show notes for this episode, there were several different spellings for the Idugum Chronicles. And so, obviously that's come through to the recording itself. Okay.
She's not called Imogen?
Imogen might be an NPC.
Good.
Excellent. Who wears something indigo, I'm sure.
That makes sense.
And the last kind of big bit of news, again, New World of Darkness related, they've done another Kickstarter recently that funded for the New World of Darkness Dark Ages. Or not Dark Age, Dark Eras.
Dark Eras,
which
yeah.
Kind of similar to how in the old World of Darkness, there was, for example, there was the Dark Ages, the Victorian era. For Mage, there was the Sorcerer's Crusade, kind of the Renaissance era. It's a book that's just a compilation that for all the games, and it introduces one or two alternate timeline settings for each of the games. It looked incredibly interesting.
I'm definitely getting a copy of that. Mage in the era of Alexander the Great and the Stone Age, if I recall correctly. Fantastic.
One of the things I didn't actually kick back this one. I wanted to, but just financially couldn't. I was reading some of the extra, the things you unlocked if they got to certain price amounts, and one of the things that they did with this was introducing new chapters for different settings. I think one of them was like Abrahamic hunter setting. Another one was Napoleonic mummy, I believe.
Wow.
I could be wrong on that. For each of the new backer rewards or Kickstarter backer rewards, there was like a new setting they were going to add. And it got to the point a little bit earlier on, I think, where they were actually asking the community what setting they wanted. So that
there was like a voting thing. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I thought that was a really, really interesting way of doing things.
The two that are of interest to me are the Changeling the Lost one, which is called Lily, Sabre and Thorn, which is 1600s through to early 1700s, which is under the reign of Louis XIV. I think Changelings plus Louis XIV, absolute win. The other one is the Geist the Sin Eaters, and this is more for actually the person writing it, because Geist the Sin Eaters will be 1950s New Zealand, written by Cam Banks, which, if you are familiar with Cam Banks' work, he's predominantly worked on things like Dragonlance in the past, but lives in New Zealand and jumped at the opportunity to showcase the islands. So I'm very much looking forward to reading more of Cam Banks.
Yeah, his D20 era stuff was great. He did if I recall correctly, he did a great supplement called Heroes of Horror with Ari Marmel, who's also old World of Darkness alumnus. So I'm interested to read that.
I'm always interested to see, especially when writers cross game lines, and to see what actually ends up happening, because it's interesting you mentioned Ari Marmel. He wrote a short story for Eberron, which is probably the creepiest Eberron story you will ever read in your life, because it's one of those that you just have a bit of a think about the ramifications of what he puts in that short story, and I've always wanted to use it as a plot hook. So I think cross-pollination, always a good thing.
Yes, do you know what the name of the story was?
I can't remember, but it was an anthology of short fiction, something like Tales of the War or Tales of the Last War, something like that. And it's literally the last story in that. If you get a chance, if you are a fan of Eberron at all, or a fan of just basic fantasy, get a hold of it and just read that last story. It's fantastic.
Wow, cool.
So does that wrap up the news?
I
Yeah.
believe.
Well, as you can see, there has been a ton of stuff happening over at
Yeah.
Onyx Path Publishing. We'll put a link to the main page in the show notes, and if any of this is of interest to you, certainly follow it up, because we're certainly at the moment spoilt for choice.
Yes, who said World of Darkness is dead? My goodness.
Right now, we'll head into the classic World of Darkness section and take a look at the meat of tonight's episode, which will be a review of Midnight Circus from the classic World of Darkness line.
Classic World of Darkness.
So tonight we're going to take an in-depth view of the Midnight Circus book, which was published in 1996 for the classic World of Darkness line. What it tries to do very, very much is to weave together all 5 of the larger game lines of the classic World of Darkness and give a setting and a series of antagonists who can all interact across those 5 game lines. It is crossover at its most intensive, and to be honest, we're treated with a veritable cavalcade of NPCs, everything from a liquefied Nosferatu, Barabai by the dozen, Jabba the Hutt as a Fomori, and an honest-to-goodness motorcycle-riding, clown-devouring Goral.
Yes.
Does this sound like the sort of game you would like to run? Well, if so, Midnight Circus is definitely the book for you. But I think that what it does very well is to tackle the idea of crossover games in the old World of Darkness. So what we'll do tonight is take an overview of the book and our impressions of how we might use it, and then also touch on the very large issue of running crossover games in the classic World of Darkness. So first of all, I thought I would open the floor to you guys for just general initial overview of this book after you'd read through it again, bearing in mind that it's almost 20 years old by itself, and see what you thought of the book.
Yeah, wow. And the thing that struck me was, if I can, sum it up as quickly as possible, is that it's pretty damn gonzo. But this can be something that puts some people off. But at the same time, I find it a massive draw. If you're going to do multiple levels of crossover, if you're going to push believability to its extreme, where better to do it than in a circus, where the normal rules of acceptability are somewhat suspended. So I thought, as a general concept, stuffing numerous splats under one cover, what better place to do it than in this deranged circus environment? Leafing through it, one of the things that really stood out to me was how well the artwork reflects the text. Sometimes you'll get art that seems only tangentially related to what you're reading, but here you can really go through each page and point at, that's Tub of Flesh, that's the Black Spiral Dancers, those are the clown people, there's Cavendish, there's Husk, etc., etc. The thing that I came away with was actually this is 5-way crossovers done right. At no particular time is it just kind of like, well, this is a Vampire the Masquerade supplement, and we've stuffed some werewolves in here, and there's a mage over there in the corner. Or, this is actually just all changeling all the time, and we're going to cast everybody as weird versions of Red Caps or what have you. It manages to make the 5 main splats fit together in a fairly coherent way, which is just such a terribly difficult thing to do. If you're a storyteller who's ever tried to run Old World of Darkness crossover games. Old World of Darkness is famous for crossovers being something that everybody did, but the game was always fairly explicit in saying you really shouldn't be doing this too much. But everyone went ahead and did it anyway. And so to see it put to such effective use was really quite refreshing. Yeah.
What about yourself, Beckett?
I agree. I think overall the book is pretty self-contained. Like you said, it's got plenty of material both for the storyteller and for players for doing a crossover. But if you wanted to, you could take this from any single game and really add, like you could have an entire chronicle or, an entire story arc with just that one game. If you wanted to play it as changelings, it would, you could do that. There's enough in this book for it to go that way. You could look at, the history of the whole circus. You could kind of go with almost a new World of Darkness Changeling, the Lost kind of approach to it for Changeling the Dreaming, and have the characters trying to escape this kind of ever-present, like imprisoning group. The Midnight Circus has kind of the unique ability that they can literally follow you just about anywhere.
That's a very good point, actually, if I can jump in there, because normally I find that the gaming fiction that appears in most of these source books, it is very hit and miss. Sometimes you get the feeling that the fiction is simply put in because we expect fiction at the beginning of a White Wolf supplement. However, what Midnight Circus does very, very well is that it uses the fiction to set the tone and to also tell a story that you could almost replicate as someone's initiation into learning that the circus exists, and then really piquing their curiosity as to how they might then go about looking into the circus, investigating it, and perhaps even giving them a very personal motivation of trying to rescue a loved one from the circus. So I think that in many ways, this hits a really high note from the very beginning of the book, just through the fiction. I've always contended that fiction should expand the game world and it should give you a solid sense of what it is about. And on both of those notes, I think that it does so perfectly.
Yeah, I completely agree. I've always been, regular listeners of the show will know that I've often been somewhat disparaging of the fiction in World of Darkness books, down to the point where I sometimes I don't even read it. But we're doing a review, and I thought I'm going to do this properly, and I haven't looked at this thing in 20 years, and I read through it, and I thought, this is great. This is really good. Like you said, there's a great little story here. There's a great personal hook. And then, of course, when you go through the book, there's all the characters from the story, and the events that are alluded to in the story are covered in the text as well, and the various background notes of the various people. So, yeah, it's a fantastic way to open it. Really good.
I agree. Normally, I kind of avoid the early and the concluding fiction. In this case, I think they did it right. They kind of showed rather than told. And it introduces a couple things in the fiction that as you read the rest of the books, into the mechanics, into the history of the circus, it kind of expands upon those things and introduces a little bit of a mystery and a bit of a hook that you can use.
Yeah, it's good.
So the book is basically divided up into 5 chapters after the fiction. So we get a history of the circus, which is Anastasio's old-time lunar carnival and midnight circus. Chapter 2 covering the whole sick crew, which is our list of NPCs. Chapter 3 gives you some operating procedures for the circus and really the method by which it goes about its business. Bread and Circuses expands upon this, and then Chapter 5, The Wasteland, is a short adventure set around New Year's Eve, which you could use to introduce the circus. So if we take a look just broadly through those chapters, and we'll discuss each one of them with some brevity as we move our way through, and also talk about how we might start to use this. My observation as well that I wanted to throw into the very beginning is that whilst the power level and whilst just the type of synergy that they are trying for is very much over the top, I would agree with Mark that they've picked very, very strategically what type of an environment they want to explore. And the circus is actually a really good choice because you expect things to be somewhat out of the ordinary. You expect to suspend your disbelief. When I was reading through this book, I think that the major source of inspiration for using this nowadays would be to take a look at the series Carnival. You familiar with that one?
I'm not. I've heard of it, but I've never seen it.
Yeah, it's something that's on my radar that I've not had a chance to watch. I definitely agree that what little I know of the show, it's something that certainly seems to fit the ethos of the book.
Oh, most certainly. Carnival essentially follows a carnival during the Great Depression, and every single character there fits sort of very, very strongly the traditional circus motifs that you would expect. So you've got the strong man, and you've got the bearded lady, for example, and you've got the snake man. But underneath it is a very, very strong supernatural theme, and the idea that the people who have actually got real power in the circus have had to trade something in order to get it. The notion that no power comes without price is strongly prevalent through both of the series. The only disappointing thing about Carnival is that it was cut prematurely short at the end of the second season due to ratings and the usual sort of network machinations that one expects from very good series with niche audiences.
That's unheard of. A great series that's cut short before its prime. I'm shocked. I tell you.
It never happens.
I got a lot of the same kind of feel, but going back a little bit, it reminded me an awful lot of Something Wicked This Way Comes. You know, both the original book and the movie, similar kind of ideas. Circus comes to town, and things have their price. So, yeah, good touchdowns.
Now, I know, Beckett, that you had some observations regarding the first chapter, the history of the circus. Would you like to share those?
Sure. It's written in a sense where, kind of like some of the other books like we did for Halls of the Arcanum, where it shows various pieces of the history and it builds upon them by presenting them as newspaper articles or interviews, and it's just small little clips and cutscenes that kind of expound upon one little aspect of it, and then the next one might build on to it in a different way. It talks about how the circus goes back ages. You know, there's no actual specific date given, but the history basically back to the beginning of time. And depending on what game line you are using as kind of the truth, I guess, in the World of Darkness, if you were using this, that could be, you know, like back to Vampire's Enoch, or it could be when the first mages awoke, or it could even be like pre-existing to our world for the, you know, Arcadia, whoever, you know, whatever time that came into existence, if it ever came into existence at all. Maybe it existed for all eternity. Some of the snippets, you know, talk about how back in the Roman times, on the vampire side, one of them goes back to early first and second city time era, at least some of the insinuations. And then it pops up to 1857. It talks about more like 1900s. Of course, this was written 20 years ago, so it doesn't go into the future, but it shows examples of what the carnival itself has been doing throughout history. I kind of like the idea on the mystical side of it being originally coming from a spirit named Kara that was kind of mistaken for Carnival, and it began as some of her rites as a way to protect humanity from the supernatural. And part of her rites were about exchanging things, and over time, as different corrupting malevolent spirits and things kind of become attached to the carnival, it completely switches its focus. But at the same time, this very minor, almost dead spirit of Kara is still present and still has a little bit of influence. I also like that this is one of the ways it begins to tie in all the different games, where both werewolf, definitely. You start seeing how werewolf as a setting begins to influence the carnival in ways that would definitely start drawing in werewolf and, you know, either Garu or Black Spiral Dancer type characters that would be interested in investigating or even joining this carnival. At the same time, it's got a reference that could be either for mage or vampire, with Apophis being another kind of mastermind that's not completely in control, but is definitely beginning to influence the carnival. I don't know. I think it's really, really well done.
I love the fact that the opening chapter is essentially a collection of handouts. So, you know, it's not a history that you have to try and drip feed your players as a storyteller in one way or the other. You could photocopy the book or print out the PDF if there's a PDF version that you have. And here you go. Here's a newspaper clipping from the 1800s, or here's an ancient stone tablet that talks about Namrel, the kite. Just really great way to make it easier on the storyteller to get this information into the game, and like you say, give hints as to what the circus has been up to over the years. Fantastic approach, I thought.
It also kind of begins to explain that when this circus comes to town, bad things happen around it. but it doesn't really give exact, I guess, ramifications.
It does leave an awful lot up to the interpretation of both the storyteller and the players. The one thing I wanted to comment on with regards to this first section, the history of the circus, is just the style, I think, works very well. I'm currently rereading Anne Rice's The Witching Hour at the moment, and in the middle of that book, it sidesteps the main narrative and provides a series of Talamasca reports on the Mayfair family from down through the generations of both the family and also of Talamasca investigators. And it speaks about reports that they get from servants and private investigators and some of the slaves of the family and the like. I thought that it was a really good way in The Witching Hour of producing a really rich narrative that essentially gives you the history, but you don't necessarily feel as though you're being lectured at. And I see a very similar approach in the history of the Midnight Circus, because it is very much that broken narrative and one that is situated in each time frame. So it doesn't make you feel as though you're reading the standard revisionist history in an Old World of Darkness books, which, to be perfectly frank, I usually skip. This one I was actually willing to read.
Yeah, it's very, very entertaining.
It moves then to Chapter 2, The Whole Sick Crew. And did you want to cover this one, Mark?
Oh, where to start? What struck me about this, and this is what I've used the book for mostly over the years. I've never run it. I've never run the Wasteland scenario. But if I ever need, a quickly started up changeling or quickly started up NPC, this is the place to go. There are pages and pages and pages of Garou, changelings, mages, a couple of wraiths, plenty of vampires, Fomori, kinfolk, Gural, you name it, it's in here. So this is what I've mainly used the book for, as a really kind of compilation of NPCs. But what it does is the book breaks it down into circles. So you have the outer circle being the more lower powered or less influential members of the circus, and then the masters of the various sideshows, the factotums of the inner trinity who run the circus itself, and then finally the ruling trinity, who are at present a mage, a changeling, and a vampire. And the idea goes that the circus has always had a trinity running it, which reflects what you were saying, Beckett, about these three forces pulling in various directions: Kara, Worm, and Apophis. But over time, who is in the trinity changes. So the rulers at the heads of the circus change from time to time. So, for example, in here, the vampire member is the most recent member of the circus, and he's still not quite sure that he's signed up to a good thing. So you have this wonderful conflict is based around triangles idea, where the various influences behind the circus are pulling their mortal or immortal representatives in various ways. And in this tug of war, this opens up the gaps, as it were, for the players to step in and start getting their fingers in the pie. So while on the surface of it, you do seem to have a collection of antagonists here, as you read through the various circles of the circus, you can see that not everybody's motivations lie in the same direction. There are numerous allies to be found, and there are places where the player characters can kind of step in and exert influence and turn a part of the circus against itself. So as a collection of NPCs, this chapter is a great depiction of how to use conflict and allegiance and competing factions in your game. So even if you're not going to be using the circus as is, you can certainly use this, for example, to model the supernatural population of a city and show how one group's influence and one group's motivations and desires will play off another one. A couple of criticisms: the amount of NPCs and the amount of motivations and factions and what have you means that it could have done with one of those relationship maps, like they had in the old Chicago Chronicles books or in Major's Book of Chantries, where you have Porthos hates Charon, and the Janissaries want to fight with the Crucible of Thig, and et cetera, et cetera. So that I think was missing, because after my first read through, I sat back and I just thought, whoa, okay, how do I make sense of this? I'm going to have to go away and draw a spider diagram or something. So yeah, that's something that I could have done with. And my other main gripe was that the high power mage, the guy who I've been waiting 60 odd pages to read about, is missing an Arete stat. Like, what? The one most important stat in his entire write-up, and it's not there. You can kind of look at his spheres and know that he's going to have at least, Arete 5. But the power level of the book means that even some of the lower-powered mages were given Arete 4, 5, and 6. So this guy's got to be at least a 7 and an 8. And that brings me on to my final point about this. And they do highlight this fairly in the book, which is that the overall power level is high. One of the first characters you meet in the outer circle of the circus, the lowly nobodies, is a Goral.
Yes.
And you think, what? Goral? And he's the bear riding a bike? What am I going to see next? And that really does set the tone for this thing. And they do, as I say, they do call it out in the introduction to the book, saying this is a high-powered supplement with a high-powered adventure. And they make the excellent point that if you just run it, say, as a straight vampire game, or if you run it as a straight mage game, the characters are probably going to fail, which really empowers the concept of the book as a piece of crossover, namely that to get the most out of it as a storyteller, but more importantly, to get the most out of it as a player, you do want to go in there as a crossover group. And certainly if you come to play through the Wasteland Adventure, stopping the atrocity wave, it's not something you're going to be able to do on your own just as a lone cabal or a lone coterie. You do really need people who can influence the mortal world, who can see the supernatural world, who can deal with spirits, who can identify and tap and stop crime, who can access the dreaming, who can tap into the Shadowlands to see what's going on there. So that synergy, I think, comes across very well.
Mm-hmm.
I would agree with the sheer overwhelming nature of the NPCs, because ultimately what we have here is 33 pages of NPC description, stats, background, motivations, and agendas. And I think that can very easily get bogged down in all of this. What they have done a really good job of doing is linking existing lore to this book. So rather than making this just kind of the ultimate mashup book and we've thrown things in, there are little nuggets of information all the way through here. Things like, for example, the vampire that you just mentioned, Mark. That vampire's sire is Prince Villon, which of course is the Prince of Paris. There are mentions of the 7th generation, which for those of us who know first edition Werewolf will ring a bell. There's mention of the resurgence for Changeling, and even one of the characters, I don't have a problem giving this one away, is listed as being the last Croatan.
Yeah.
Which,
and they even name check Sasha Vikos too, just in case you're thinking there's a World of Darkness book that Sasha Vikos doesn't appear in. No, she is in here as well.
Although there is a complete lack of Rasputin.
Yes, no, this is true. There is no Rasputin.
Well, that might answer the question why there's no Arete score listed.
Devin Cavendish, your secret is revealed.
We know who you really are. However, I think that for storytellers who maybe aren't as familiar with all of the 5 game lines, this is probably the most daunting chapter in the entire book. Up front, back in the introduction, it does say, here's a list of books that will be handy to have in order to get the most value out of this book. It's a fairly daunting list.
Weren't we talking about a World of Darkness checklist earlier?
Yeah.
Yes. And I think that even though it says in the introduction, for example, if you don't have a copy of Changeling the Dreaming, then substitute something that you think is appropriate. The problem with that statement is it presupposes that you take one of 2 looks at the NPCs. On one hand, you could simply read through an NPC's background and say, okay, I've got a bit of a gist about what this character is about. What are some powers that I think that this person would have in order to achieve their goals? And you could substitute some in there. The second line of reasoning, however, is a little bit more vague, which would say that in order to substitute, you would need to actually have a solid idea of what the skills, powers, and talents actually do in order to look for substitutions, at which case you may as well just use the character as it is and do a little bit of research. So I feel that in this chapter, one of the things that, by necessity, they had to create each one of the NPCs true to form and true to the setting which it inhabits. But on the other side, I think that it makes some of the concepts here a little less accessible to people who don't have that stack of books to cross-check.
Yeah, I was really impressed by that as I was reading through it. I thought several times, these guys really know their stuff, the writers, and of course, Ethan Skemp is the developer, so you know that he's going to have exercised a really fine eye over the top of it. But yeah, it all rang true. The stuff on the changelings and the way that they use, as one of the characters gives glimpses of Arcadia to lure changelings to do her bidding, or the way that they play the whole Son of Ether. There's a crazed kind of Son of Ether former technocrat. So, prior to the Sons of Ether defecting to the traditions, he comes from that era of the Sons of Ether, which is a great little nugget in there. So, yeah. But then, as you say, if you're not overly familiar with all this, it's just a little bit esoteric. So, yeah, it's a challenging piece of work. But I think it's the kind of thing where if you really are an old World of Darkness aficionado and you have the kinds of bookshelves that we have, you're going to get a lot out of this book.
That then brings us to the remaining chapters, which give us an overview of how you might like to use the circus within your own games, as well as giving us really some of the stock standard pieces that you can expect to find at the circus. For example, it gives you Koba's progressive clown show, which it's a true World of Darkness fare in that it is truly beguiling and somewhat disturbing at the same time. I'll let listeners have a read through that section all of their own. But the aforementioned motorcycle riding, clown devouring Goral makes an appearance here. We have the World of Darkness take on the Tunnel of Love, which is a truly disturbing place, run by a cult of ecstasy Barabai. Those two things should give you a bit of a tone on how it actually works. The other one, of course, is Xanadu's Mirror Palace, and you can see already that the authors have taken great pains to look at what we normally find in a sideshow or a circus and have then put a particularly dark spin on them. And mirrors, for me, hold a particular place in the World of Darkness, that they are inherently creepy. They are something which features in the folklore of an awful lot of cultures and is something that you can get a lot of chill factor out of. So the book does quite well in these sorts of things, as well as giving you things like the merry-go-round, for example, as just a very short write-up. Overall, they've given us a very good overview of the types of things that you would naturally expect here, and then a lot of really good ideas on how you might use them within your own chronicle, and some of the denizens that you can expect in any of these sorts of places. Now, my question to you guys is, did any of these places really stand out to you?
For me, the one you just mentioned, Xanadu's Mirror Palace, really stood out because kind of regardless of what exactly you do, how you run or use the Midnight Circus, it's kind of a place that I think you could initially start out kind of hinting and showing different aspects of horror, playing upon the whole reflections, and then like if you were playing a mage game, you could do different aspects of like altered reality and play upon what the characters see, play upon things that they see out of the corner of their eye or whatever. But one of the things that is really, really interesting about this, and I'm not going to spoil it, but it ties in directly with some of the circus's history in regards to the last version of the Infernal Triad.
Mm-hmm.
And there's an NPC here that you could definitely use, either if this is an antagonistic group that your characters are trying to investigate and take down, you're a hunter, for example, or if you're actually members of the circus and you're trying to find a way to escape. this NPC, who is a complete bastard, could be used to give you an edge on, and even fill you in on some of the secrets of both the history of the circus and also the current political status and weaknesses of some of the higher ranking inner circle members.
Yeah, well, I was gonna mention the Hall of Mirrors as well, but I was gonna spoil it, but I won't now. But no, I think it is a fantastic little environment because it is one of the most dangerous places in the circus. When you step into the Hall of Mirrors, you are in for a terrible, terrible time. But as Beck has pointed out, there are prizes in there that can unravel the whole motley crew. So no, I'll leave that secret unspoiled then. But yeah, that is something that really stood out to me. A couple of other things I will gloss over briefly. The Ferris wheel that allows you to go straight into the heart of the Tempest, which is covered in just kind of a brief paragraph, and I just thought, can I reread that again? It's a what? Terrifying. I mean, for Wraith players, this is, right into the heart of darkness, and it's the Ferris wheel. So, yeah, brilliant. But the other two things were you've mentioned one of them already, was the competing factions of clowns. I thought that was a fantastic idea, that there's these various groups of clowns who hate each other, and particularly the progressive one, the super artistic bohemian style clowns. They really stood out to me because they're just so disgruntled and they're so upset, and their deeply insightful art is not being taken seriously by the more kind of frightening, terrifying Pennywise style clowns. But the one location that I really wanted to dwell on for a minute was the fortune telling tent, because of what it does with the different types of fortune tellers that you have in folklore, and it takes 3 of these and gives each one, to put it in mage terms, a very compelling paradigm. And depending on when you visit the fortune telling tent, and depending on which of the fortune tellers is holding court at the particular time, the contents and trappings of the tent change subtly to match either this kind of ancient Persian approach, or Indian mystics, or the more kind of classical gypsy fortune telling style of things. And it manages to touch on that without making any of the mistakes that the World of Darkness gypsies did. So I found that particularly rich in flavor, and somewhere that characters could go back to multiple times, and the face of the fortune telling tent changes each time they visit. And it's also, again, remarkable, as it's a place that shows that not everything in the circus is malevolent. There are aspects there that the characters can tap into to find support and to find sanctuary. And in a place like the Midnight Circus, having somewhere where you can just catch your breath, regenerate your willpower points, if you will, that's extremely vital to have.
Something that kind of caught my eye with that, you could kind of tweak it a little bit if you wanted to, and either kind of represent the 3 main fortune tellers as, like, for instance, the 3 hags from kind of classical fiction.
Yeah, exactly.
Or for a vampire. And this could extend a little bit to mage too, but I think it's more well known in vampire, is the different aspects of Lilith as the maid, the mother, and the crone. The
crone, yeah. It's very very strong in that regard, I think.
And that level of customization, I think, is present through a lot of these locations by the very nature of the Midnight Circus, being that it is crossing all of the game lines. There's nothing to say that you couldn't slightly alter the intent or some of the NPCs around this, or even include some of the game lines that weren't included in the original version. For example, if you decided that it would make perfect sense to have one of these areas run by Kweijin or by one of the Shemsuheru, then certainly you could do so. This gives you all of the tools and, if you will, the permission to mash up whatever you possibly wanted in here.
This may have predated Kindred of the East, but there's actually one character in here, one of the first ones as well. Page 33, what is
the mine.
Tamika. Mm-hmm. Tamika. She could very easily be substituted for a Kweijin instead of a Kindred, especially if she went with what Dharma is it? The Thousand Whispers, is it?
The ones with the masks?
The ones that are constantly changing their life.
Yep, you're correct. Thousand Whispers. Yeah.
Could be a really interesting take on her, because she's kind of so insane. She believes that she's a character in a fiction, and everybody else is kind of like a, side personnel.
Everybody else is an NPC.
Yeah.
What it then moves through is that after giving us a huge number of these locations, and I think importantly, a number of way stations and sanctuaries, places where, as Mark mentioned, you can catch your breath or replenish your power, or at least just get a quiet place to try and figure out what on earth is going on. We're also treated then to some mechanics around how the circus starts to ensnare people. And quite rightly, these are snares, barbs, and investments. These are just little ways of the circus starting to get hooks into the souls of those who come through the front door. Some of it can be done quite blatantly, and others is done by deception and trickery. But what I like throughout the discussion of how characters are given snares and barbs is that, generally speaking, if you look back over the encounter in which you are given a snare or a barb, you should be able to see that the truth was there all along. For example, there's one where you're actually literally asked to sign your soul away, but the way in which you are asked to do so is completely incongruous with the gravity of the situation. You might just do it as a fun and offhand thing to do, but what you have in fact done is literally signed your soul away.
And there's even the little contract in the book as well that you can print out. And here, just sign this. It's fine.
And I think at one point it actually suggests photocopying those and passing them around the table and just seeing how many characters sign them out of some sort of perverse joy.
Well, I like how one of the NPCs actually knows what's going on with this, and in his case, he's only signed away a portion of his soul, a percentage.
Yes, he's still got a controlling interest of 53.7% in his soul.
I thought that was brilliant.
I think that the subtlety that you could handle this with is certainly inherent in the book because, as I said, you can go back and you can see where was it that my character went wrong, and there should be almost a series of signposts along the way that you then kick yourself for not seeing, as opposed to the rather ham-fisted way that you can deal with this. And I will hearken back to, in Mage the Ascension, the first edition Book of Madness with their idea of demonic investments. It was very mechanically driven, and there wasn't a lot of advice around how to handle this with a certain amount of finesse. So you can see that the maturity has definitely come into the writing and the concepts around this slow damnation, and I think the book is certainly better for it.
Yeah, it's one of my favourite parts of the book. That was the snares and barb system. Excellent piece of work, and it's the kind of thing that you can pull out and transplant into pretty much any game that involves gradual possession or gradual corruption. I was really pleased to see that.
So after this, we then get to a level which starts to talk about Chapter 4, Bread and Circuses, which walks us through really how each one of the supernatural game lines understands the carnival, and it also gives us the deep, dark secrets of the carnival, as well as a few rules, mechanics on handling crossover games. Really, it does what it says on the tin here. And then lastly, we're given an adventure scenario called The Wasteland. Who wants to take this one?
Well, I'll talk a little bit about it. What I enjoyed about it is it uses iconic elements. So as you mentioned before, it's set around New Year's Eve. So there's the whole symbolic aspect of changing from old to new. But what struck me as nice about it is it's a series of timed events. So there's a number of NPCs that you interact with, and their motivations lead the characters through the story. But at the same time, there are things going off irrespective of what the player characters actually do. So this lends it a certain sense of urgency. And that's important to have certainly something as powerful as the circus, that this thing is rumbling along, doing its own thing, and you really need to move if you want to prevent the issues from, the atrocity wave, as it's called in the adventure, from coming to pass. Which, in and of itself, by the way, without giving away too many spoilers, is a completely deranged idea, which I loved. Being a musician myself, the idea that you can, take musical expression and performance and turn it into this murderous sound wave that kills dozens of people. Yeah, great. Really, really cool. There's also, nicely, a little mini setting. The adventure itself is nominally set in New York, but if you want to take this this wasteland, which refers to a particularly run-down part of town, to harken back to what you were saying, Adrian, about Detroit and Only Lovers Left Alive, this is something you can plonk down into any large urban sprawl where your game is set, and use actually outside of the context of Midnight Circus. So if you just need some inspiration for urban decay and ruined, broken parts of a city, there's material here that you could lift and use as is, pretty much wholesale from the book. So that's nice. And then, of course, you have the flow of the adventure itself, being driven by these timed events, being driven by the motivations of the NPCs. So it's not something where you're necessarily having to force the players through. If you use the hooks, and it gives some very good sample hooks to get characters from various splats into the adventure, then the structure itself kind of pulls them through without too much effort from the storyteller. And then the way it resolves is likewise handled in a really sensible way, showing how the various different supernatural groups will tackle what happens at the end, will tackle the climax. So at all points through the adventure, it harkens back to the structure of the rest of the book, namely in that it treats the crossover elements with a degree of respect and a degree of use that you can put to use with ease as a storyteller.
I'd completely agree with that assessment, and even though I've never run the Wasteland, I think that it's set out very logically, and I think that it's set out in terms of how the rest of the book is reflected in this. It's almost that the preceding 4 chapters have kind of set the tone and set the way in which you would approach a potential crossover game, and then it gives you an actual working example. So it's a nice way of capping off the book.
Yeah, that's good.
So in terms of final thoughts of Midnight Circus, we've looked at whether or not we feel that it fits the world of darkness, whether or not the power levels are appropriate, and also whether or not the venue itself is the most appropriate. I think in order to evaluate this, it would be a question of how would you use this book in your own game?
Yeah, in my own game, as it is, I probably wouldn't use it, because when I run, say, for example, if I run Mage, I try to keep the population to mostly mages. And when I run Werewolf, it's just mostly werewolves. So a crossover game for me is, like a season finale that you have just once every now and then. But if you're going to run a game that is set in the larger world of darkness that embraces crossover, then there's a number of ways to use it. And you have to be cautious as a storyteller with that, because it will affect the overall feel of your game. When, if you're starting off with a fairly tight focus in your mage game, or a fairly tight ambiance of doomed predators in a vampire game, and then you've got Tub of Flesh waddling across the scene, it's jarring. So you have to take that into account, I think. But that said, if you're going to use it, well, there's a few things we touched on already. The repository of NPCs that it is just great, and that's what I've used it for up to now. The snares and barbs system, the best things in the book. And Adrian, what you said about the original Book of Madness, it's completely true. In an early Mage game, I had a character who went looking for investments, and I was like, well, how am I gonna play this other than she goes, please, can I have demonic armor? And you go, okay, here's your demonic armor. This system allows you to corrupt characters and corrupt cabals and coteries and packs and what have you, subtly, so you can have this kind of unpleasant intrusion into the game without the characters realizing it, until all of a sudden there's these horrendous things happening around them. That's using elements of it without actually using the Midnight Circus itself. So to use the circus itself, there's 3 main things that spring to mind for me. And the first one, of course, is the obvious one. It's inspired by the opening fiction, which is a rescue mission. So that somebody close to the characters or close to one of their family members or loved ones has unfortunately been snared, has unfortunately received a number of barbs and has been taken away by the circus. And what's nice about this is it's the most easy access, because it could be a wraith, it could be one of the mages, it could be your pet gargoyle. It could be a bygone to whom you're allied. And that gives you an immediate personal motivation to go into a place that you would normally never, ever, ever, ever want to go and get them out. Secondly, just touching on Mage, for example, one thing that I was struck by was how many Horizon realms this place has access to.
Oh, yeah.
The Hall of Mirrors is one good example of that. And there's lots of little places where it opens up into a variety of pocket dimensions. So, for example, you may need to get the cranial nose ring of Billy out of one of these Horizon realms. It's been lost for centuries. And the only way to get to that place is to go through the Midnight Circus. So that gives you a motivation, again, to go into a place you'd really be better off steering clear of. But the last way I'd use it actually was I was really struck by, I mentioned it earlier on, the history chapter, how it's all clippings and news reports and forgotten lore. And Beckett, you mentioned the Halls of the Arcanum. For an Arcanum game or for a Project Twilight game, it's just dripping with hooks there. So, perhaps you're trying to bring a member of the circus to justice. Let's say you've discovered that there were murders in the 1920s in your local town, and somebody who was in their teens then, he's now far, far older, he spotted one of the guys who was involved in these crimes, but the person hasn't aged. So now the local Project Twilight agents or the local Arcanum investigators or members of the Inquisition are going to go and track down this supposedly ageless murderer in what appears to be on the surface just a sort of X-Files-y mystery. And then you realize that, in fact, there's this entire circus behind it, and you've gotten yourself very rapidly in over your heads.
How about yourself, Beckett? How would you use it?
There's a lot of potential for this one. I'm a little bit more open to an actual, crossover. So using it kind of as presented, I think could be a potential possibility. I would tend to probably want to focus more on the circus being an antagonistic group and probably more of a story arc than kind of the chronicle itself. So like you mentioned, somebody close to the character is kidnapped or disappears around the chronicle. One thing that kind of struck me as very odd and with a lot of potential, this was produced before Hunter the Reckoning. The characters being introduced to the carnival could be a really interesting way for a group of hunters to basically become hunters. This could be kind of their introductory prelude, and because they are so unprepared for what they would encounter, it would kind of necessitate being much more of an investigation style game than go in and kill everything, because they will be destroyed. And there's a lot of interesting directions they can go with this. They could kind of go to trying to redeem and reinstitute the original purpose of the carnival. They could go and trying to, if the carnival and specifically the Infernal Triad are kind of the BBEGs, I guess, the kind of the bad guys at the end that they're trying to either kill or get rid of. It could be something they could, progressively advance towards to that point, and kind of similar to typical Werewolf the Apocalypse. It's a battle that they're going to lose, but it's the build up to that final battle. I think there's a lot of potential for a normal crossover game where, one person's playing a werewolf, one person's playing a changeling, to kind of highlight the different knowledges and worldviews that they each might have as they gain information and the history of the carnival, or they interact with the various NPCs, and just kind of play upon the idea of like a changeling might know, or this might relate a lot more to a changeling's kind of history and lore than it does to everybody else, and what that character can bring to the game with that. I thought going back to chapter 1, the introduction, and where it kind of explains the history, I thought it was very interesting that the changeling that is in control of the Midnight Circus as part of the Infernal Triad, sometime in the past, she actually changed the symbol of the Midnight Carnival Midnight to the crescent moon. I thought that could really play in well with the idea from the Perseus fragments and the Book of Nod, the idea of the last daughter of Eve with the mark of the crescent moon.
Yeah.
That a little bit. I also thought it was kind of interesting, and this actually plays in really well with the newest Dark Ages, E20 Dark Ages, how they've changed the Salubri, that original vampire from the history, Namriel. A lot of the Salubri take that name, especially with the Warrior Salubri, take a name that ends in EL, the L.
Yes, yeah.
As a kind of an angelic, I don't know, it's part of their kind of code. A lot of the information about that vampire, which we don't have very much of, but it talks about how she left Canaanite society way back in the day and was teaching mortals, symbols and rituals that they could use to ward off evil. It kind of sounds like that could very easily be a Salubri.
That's a great idea, yeah.
Thought that was interesting. The one thing I really loved about the Midnight Circus, though, which is very pertinent to each of the World of Darkness games, is this kind of unknown, mysterious sense of hope and redemption that you can kind of play upon with Spirit of Kara.
Yeah.
And how it's kind of infuriating to one of the members, but something is happening where he's the vampire, so his humanity is really dropping. But it's kind of the opposite of what happens with the Frenzy and the Beast. Something is taking over him and making him be a better person.
Yeah, I love the way that the Kara is kind of woven in still in depth in the depths of the carnival there. And there's a handful of NPCs who are highlighted as this person knows about the secret of Kara.
The last thing I want to say, and I think we'll talk about this a little bit more, is this book, kind of as it is, could be very excellent and easily interposed into the new World of Darkness. It already has an existing NPC that is a Promethean. The guys, the singers, it'd be very easy to bring the carnival into that game, or to transplant some of the existing NPCs into Geist, or same with Hunter the Vigil. You could actually probably even make an entire new sect or creed based on just around the carnival.
Cool.
I like all of those ideas, and I think that when we get to the New World of Darkness section, we'll have to explore those in slightly more detail. I've always been somebody who has shied away from crossovers, and when people talk about the old World of Darkness as having this reputation for lots of crossovers and implied that that's part of the setting, I'm kind of a little bit lost, because my experience has never been of a crossover game ever. So when I take a look at this, it's more of how would I integrate it into a chronicle that I already have. And my three ideas that I have around this is that one is the rescue mission, which has already been touched on. I have thought about using this in one of my Werewolf Chronicles many years ago, where I wanted them to rescue a named NPC from the Rage Across New York supplement. He's a glasswalker by the name of Red Alert, and he's gone missing and has fallen to Harano. And I thought that the circus would be a really fantastic place to really play up how dangerous Harano is, and then play up the redemptive aspect where you're trying to drag someone out of Harano against the backdrop of the circus. I think you get some very powerful scenes out of that. My second one would be, I would love to run this game for mortals, but run it as part of an Inquisition chronicle. It would be a long exercise in restraint, but really it would be an interesting mix that if these guys were on the hunt for something that had cropped up in the area, or something that they had been tracking, perhaps you could then have a bit of a crossover in terms of mortals, where the Arcanum is feeding information to the Inquisition in order to bring about some sort of act of justice, and then the Inquisition are going in to try and grab a single denizen of the circus and drag them out. My third one is an idea that my party has kicked around for years, because we've run a series of very long chronicles that have resulted in very powerful PCs. And the idea that we've kept kicking around is to run a short adventure where the players are allowed to look through their character folders, and they can pick one of their characters from our previous chronicles, and we would make a party based on the choices of the players. So I think that this would be a really good opportunity to get an idea like that up and running, where you say, well, I'll play the character I played in our Mage Chronicle, or I'm going to play the character from our Dark Ages game, or I'm going to play the character from our Werewolf, and just as a one-off, you bring all of those guys together and run this as a session.
Yeah, that would be fun.
There you have it, folks, an overview of the Midnight Circus, and hopefully we've begun a discussion about crossovers. It's a massive topic that we could devote a number of episodes to, so if you'd like to discuss this on the G Plus community or drop us a line, certainly do so, because we'd love to hear how crossover has been worked into your own chronicles. It is time to move now to the secret frequency, and as I like to say, everything is better with Colt, and that includes the secret frequency.
It's under the stairs. I want my mom.
Absolutely, yes. Cargo cults. Everything is better with cults. So, what are these things? Well, to New World of Darkness players of Mage of the Awakening, you may already have encountered cargo cults in the book Summoners, which we touched on in the space of about 5 seconds in a Darker Days episode a few years back, so let's unpack this a little bit more and see what we're talking about here. So a cargo cult is a practice that grew out of essentially cargo drops made to the Melanesian islands by more technologically advanced nations, initially in the late 19th century, but more prominently throughout the middle of the 20th century. The Japanese were the first to do it, and the Allied forces followed. What would happen is they would bring military equipment, food and supplies, etc., to their forces stationed in these islands throughout the Pacific. Now, of course, this brought massive change to the indigenous peoples living on those islands, strangers from the sky or from overseas arriving in terrifying and wondrous machines, bringing incredible goods, bringing food, bringing plenty. Now, the ever-redoubtable Wikipedia describes what happened next very succinctly. As the wars in the Pacific drew to an end, these various militaries abandoned their air bases, they stopped making the cargo drops, and in response to this, charismatic individuals indigenous to the islands developed cults that promised to bestow on the cult's followers these deliveries of food and arms, jeeps, etc. that had now stopped. The cult leaders explained that if you followed the practices of the cult, the goods would flow once more, gifts from the ancestors or other sources, as had occurred with the outsiders' armies. In attempts to get the cargo to fall by parachute once more, to land again in planes, or to arrive once more on ships, the islanders started imitating the practices that they'd seen carried out by the soldiers and the sailors and the airmen. These behaviors usually involved mimicking day-to-day activities and the dress styles of US soldiers. So they would perform parade ground drills with wooden or salvage rifles. They would carve headphones made of wood and wear them while sitting in fabricated control towers. They would wave landing signals while standing on runways they'd built, or light signal fires and torches to illuminate runways and lighthouses. Obviously, it's a form of sympathetic magic going on here. Many of them took it a step further and built life-size replicas of airplanes out of straw and cut new military-style landing strips out of the jungle, hoping to attract more planes. In an example of what we would call magical thinking, the cult members thought that these foreigners had some special connection to their deities and ancestors, where they were the only beings powerful enough to produce such riches. Now, these cults were typically created by individual leaders, charismatic individuals in the Melanesian culture. And of course, to the outside observer, it's not really clear if these were sincere or if they were just simply trying to scam their gullible populations. They tended to hold the rituals well away from established towns and colonial authorities, and would be remiss if I didn't mention that some scholars argue that this interpretation is just flat wrong, that the actual goal was not really to obtain material goods, but it was more about creating and renewing social relationships that had suffered in the wake of the wars and the activities of colonial powers. But this is the world of darkness, and we would rather that there is something creepy and cultic taking place here. And how can we take this seemingly strange practice and use it to spin some great stories? Well, first up, sympathetic magic. The idea that like produces like, that if you see on one particular day, the plane arrives, people on the ground wave the coloured sticks, cargo drops from the plane, clearly the coloured sticks produce the cargo. You can run with that attitude. So what if it actually does work? What if these cults are still existing, and many of them do still exist to this day? They see planes flying high overhead, commercial airliners and what have you, and they start their cultic activities. What if it starts to work, and they start diverting commercial flights from their flight path by magical influence? What if they accidentally draw the attention of military bases, many of which are still scattered throughout the Pacific? You could end up with stranded military personnel stuck on these islands. Flights could be dragged off course, and you could have something very similar to the TV show Lost, where a plane crashes in an isolated area where the magical paradigm is strong. Normal instruments can fail, and in fact it's the power of the cult that now holds sway. This could lead you to all sorts of tales. Stepping away from the Pacific environment, you can use the activities of cargo cults as a model for magical practices that are designed to replicate or draw the attention of poorly understood phenomena. Now, one good example of this would be, for example, a bunch of sleepers witness some mages, a cabal of mages, behaving in a certain way accidentally. They stumble in upon a ritual that the mages are carrying out, see things they're not supposed to see. The mages are perhaps just trying to power up their node, or they're summoning an unbrood to gain insight or what have you. And these sleepers witness this kind of event, but they're unobserved by the mages. The mages don't realize that they've been spotted. The sleepers then decide to try and copy the mages. They realize, well, this produced a particular result that the sleepers want to copy, and their results are unexpectedly successful. So now, the mages have to tackle the problem of a sleeper cult using rituals incorrectly, but with probably disastrous results. They've summoned the wrong type of unbrood. Take a look at the first issues of the Sandman comic, where the hermetic pseudo-cult there tries to summon death, and they don't get death at all. They get dream, which has ramifications that spread across the entire globe with the sleepy sickness there. You don't need to, of course, put it on such a large scale, but any kind of issues that arise out of unwarranted sleeper activity are going to get the local concilium particularly riled up for players of Mage the Awakening, or the local tradition chantry for Ascension players. Your cabal needs to get this problem sorted out and stowed away before your superiors find out that these sleepers are using a ritual that only you're supposed to know, that you've been gifted by the Concilium, and that somehow these guys are using it and broadcasting it on YouTube. Yeah, you want to get that taken care of pretty damn quickly. Riffing on the idea of deceit on the part of the cult leaders, what if the activities of the cult aren't really doing what its members think it is? So the cult leader knows what these rituals are really going to be doing. He tells people that, yeah, it will bring cargo from the skies again, the ancestors will once more reward you with jeeps, but in fact it's not going to bring the attention of technologically advanced nations at all. He's using it to exert influence over his members for personal gain. Maybe he wants to summon spirits to further his own personal agendas. Maybe he is in contact from things from the beyond. You might have your characters stranded in Melanesia, and they have to work to overcome this corruption, even if the indigenous people don't want them to. The locals of a particular island might not want your characters coming in and messing up this strong social structure that has been holding them together for several generations. They don't want to hear about the fact that it's going to be, summoning a specter from the maelstrom. This is part of their social grouping. So it raises compelling cultural questions about the right to exert influence on local customs because you think you know better. And as a twist on that, the player characters could overcome the cult leader and then find out that the cargo cult's activities were in fact holding back something even worse. He's not summoning malevolent spirits, he's summoning guardian spirits. And now that the guardian spirits are no longer around, whatever it is that's been sleeping in the volcano is going to wake up. So your supposedly helpful activities have just simply made things completely worse, and now you have to fix the consequences of your meddling. Now finally, I just want to touch on what it says in Summoners. In there, the cargo cults they're called the Atakai, and the idea is in there that some of the planes that were overflying these Melanesian islands aren't from our world at all. They're just weird entities that look like planes. Just to kind of read what it says here, they're off, they're asymmetrical, a propeller engine on one wing, something that looks like a black cube on the other. Cargo would drop from them indeed, but it wasn't human cargo, nor cargo from this world. The packages that hit the beach were inscribed with symbols that matched nothing on human record, and the things that are in the boxes are objects, normal objects to begin with, but things that pulse with power. And it also further riffs on this idea with asking the question, where do the Atakai come from? Where do these strange plane-like objects hail from? What's their home dimension? What happens if you can actually go there? How would you manage to access this original point where these strange entities are coming from? And it gives three fantastic little hooks here. One is a plane crash. suffering apparent death in a plane wreck may cause a mage to awaken in this other plane of existence. Or you could catch a ride with one of the Atakai. The weird plane objects appear briefly in this world, lose cargo, and then head back to their home plane. Find a way to hijack one of them, hitch a ride on one of these strange objects back to the other dimension, and then hope you can find a way home again. Alternately, destroying a very powerful artifact could cause a terrible, gut-wrenching flash, a momentary look into this true material realm where these strange objects are bringing curious artifacts into our world from. Now, there are a number of cargo cults that actually exist in our world. John Frum is the most famous, but I wanted briefly, as a good upstanding Englishman, to touch on the cult of Prince Philip, who's our prince consort and the husband to the queen. He is revered as a divine entity in one of these cargo cults, with exchanges of photographs that have deep ritual significance between the islanders and Buckingham Palace, who don't seem in any hurry to disabuse the locals of the notion that this guy is not an earth-bound god. So within the World of Darkness, of course, you'd have to riff upon that. And I would say look no further than the Invisibles comic, where running through that comic is the theme that the British royal family are up to no good, that they are in fact trying to birth strange creatures through manipulating the royal bloodline. And there is a fantastic element in there, and this take.
They're not?
Have I let the secret out? There's going to be a knock at my door shortly. There's a storyline in The Invisibles where it's set after the death of Princess Diana, where they draw a mythological element to that of Diana the Huntress, where her death was in fact part of an occult sacrifice. And if you scratch the surface of the numerous deranged conspiracy theories surrounding Princess Diana's death, you will find people laying the blame at Prince Philip's feet. So without wishing to lend credence to such nuttiness, you have here a really interesting angle that there is a cargo cult dedicated to a member of the royal family who is not above doing away with individuals in society who have strong mythological resonances in their identity and in their names in order to further the goals of his own cult. So what do you guys make of the cargo cult? Something you could use, do you think?
I was going to say, I think so. I think it would kind of take a very particular sort of story, though. Or it could be a lot more easily just for a single story arc. Something that popped out for me was how to use this for Geist. Perhaps the natives, the leader of the cult that kind of initiated the whole process, perhaps they're actually more of a more spiritually inclined individual, and they noticed that not really directly, but when the various militaries came to their island or they're around them, they noticed something spiritually changed. Maybe the armies brought more malevolent foreign spirits with them, or something about their normal military practices kind of changed the landscape in the spirit world in some way. Maybe it brought some kind of spirit storms, or it started to deplete their magic. Maybe the cult itself is actually a way to either learn the new rituals that these foreigners used and probably didn't even know about, or it could be that maybe when they interpreted the various military, like walking a guard shift or sitting in the tower, they observed these rituals actually seem to have some effect on these spirits. So they're trying to emulate those, like you said, to kind of hold something back.
Yeah.
I think something that could also be really, really interesting would be to take a look at, and perhaps even combine, both Geist from the New World of Darkness and from the Old World of Darkness, Wraith the Great War.
Yeah.
And kind of look at how maybe everything that is happening in the mystical supernatural side is actually happening with the undead, the ghosts and wraiths that are trapped here in this foreign land. And what's even more interesting on that aspect is they're mingling with the ghosts of their enemies and the ghosts of the natives, and they have no common ground. And it's kind of the reverse idea from Wraith, where they have the Kingdom of Jade, the Kingdom of the Ebony Kingdom, things like that. It's these other foreigners are being trapped in the Deadlands of a foreign land. And
that's nice, yeah.
You could definitely go with that. Another idea is it could be just another move in the jihad for Vampire. And this is maybe the aspect that the players might encounter, but all the machinations underneath that the wheels within wheels that they might discover, kind of start slowly tracking it down to some ancient vampire, perhaps someone like a 4th or 5th generation kindred or Cainite that is still in torpor on the land, and they're having a war, even if it's one on the astral plane with another, and everybody's just kind of caught in the middle.
Yeah, very cool.
So those are some of the ideas I had. Another I don't know how well it could fit, but imagine if one of the Promethean had kind of stowed away with the military and they traveled here, and because the Promethean, if they stay in one place too long, they begin to have this wasting effect, and perhaps the locals noticed this and they attributed it incorrectly to the military, when instead there was a Promethean there, and they've begun to try and emulate what the military did, or what the local community of foreigners did, trying to push back this growing wasteland effect without realizing that it's from a different cause completely.
Well, that's really cool. Yeah.
I think that my two ways of dealing with this would be very similar to what you guys have suggested, in terms of the idea that the local population has emulated a particular set of movements without actually understanding what they are. I would like to see this as an old guru camp of Uktena Bane tenders. And down through the centuries, the Bane tenders have bound something to the land, and through rituals have kept it placated and have kept it bound. And when basically the Uktena tribe realized that they were running very low on full-blood guru, they started to teach some of the kinfolk how, as a last-ditch effort, a way of keeping this bane bound to the land. And so as different practices have emerged, this has just slowly grown and grown, so it is now no longer even remotely identifiable with the original guru rite of binding. So I think that even in that situation, you could say that the kinfolk who are performing these rituals don't know what they're doing. They do, however, know that they're very important to keep doing, and if someone was to come in with the idea of showing them the error of their ways and stopping them, it has catastrophic consequences.
Yeah.
I'm not entirely sure what to do with this idea, but I was thinking that what if the way in which the local population behaves in terms of emulating a lot of these types of behaviours, especially the link to consumerism, what would happen if this was a very deliberate ploy by a Toreador vampire to create the world's largest installation art piece? This
Fantastic.
installation art piece is called The Folly of Capitalism and is kept alive.
That is brilliant. I'm not sure how to use that either, but that is brilliant.
No, I like the idea. If anyone can come up with a way that I can use this in a game, I'm there. But no idea how I'd use it in a practical sense.
Something else you could probably do with this is a tie-in with the God Machine Chronicles, kind of like we talked about with the other groups, where the locals recognize something is different, and in this case, it's actually that when the foreign armies came, they did something that disturbed the God Machines because they're more spiritually inclined. Maybe they're animists, or maybe they're kind of I don't want to make it derogatory sounding, but just a kind of primal, primitive religion. Maybe they're more in tune with the workings and changings of the God Machine, and in order to, what they're attempting to do is prevent the God Machine from sending its guardians and its avatars down to fix things. So the only way that they've found that can actually do this so far is to emulate what the foreign military were basically doing.
To keep it broken.
Well, to keep it broken, but also to keep it, I guess, kind of low on the radar.
Yeah. That's
And,
nice.
Or maybe they don't know what they're doing. Maybe it's just they noticed it kind of works and things are getting better, or not getting worse at least.
Well, it's like once it's been set in motion, the error in the God machine can perpetuate itself. So these people continue doing these things without really realizing why they're doing it, and they're stuck in a glitch. They're stuck in a loop. Nice.
Something else kind of a little bit off the wall is perhaps, like I think Adrian was explaining how they made a plane, but it was very off. The angles were not correct, and there was pieces missing, but they weren't really just missing, there was something else in their place that, to us, shouldn't be there. What if it's actually something, what they're trying to do is perfect something that may have been lost, either from like Atlantis, or even perhaps something that came before that. The idea that the technology that we're using, in this case the airplanes, are actually a incomplete copy of some ancient technology.
Cool. There's been,
but maybe they have more of a inclination to it, but they just can't get it right.
Nice. I like that. So it's something that's been edited out of our reality, and we have imperfectly grasped it, and we're trying to reproduce it, and that's great. I like that. Yeah.
I don't know. I think there's a lot you could do with that. It seems like a kind of weird, odd topic, but I think there's a lot of meat to it that you can use.
As I said at the very beginning, everything is better with Coles. Okay, so we're going to move now into the last segment for tonight's episode, which is the New World of Darkness section. In this discussion, we'll be taking a quick look at how we might use circus and carnival material from the New World of Darkness. Now, given my rather poor knowledge overall of the New World of Darkness, I'm going to take a slight back seat in this segment and let Mark and Beckett run the show. So roll up, and we will see how we can use circuses in the New World of Darkness. It's all yours, gentlemen.
World of Darkness 2.0.
The first thing I want to say is the New World of Darkness, in general, is a lot more open and apt to allow a crossover style game. The sort of gross imbalance between the different game lines in the old World of Darkness is not nearly as prevalent in the new one. There's also not really the idea that, for example, werewolves automatically hate vampires and want to kill them on sight. That doesn't exist. An individual werewolf may, and an individual vampire may, but as a truth for like the entire supernatural race, doesn't exist. And like I mentioned earlier, I think Midnight Circus as a book is pretty easy to actually kind of cross over and take and use as is, with minor adjustments, just to the new system. It's got plenty of hooks that you can use or build upon or change if you need to for your individual game. Like I mentioned earlier, it already has an NPC in there that is essentially a Promethean already. Husk, the created golem, he's essentially an unstatted Promethean, and you can kind of take and use that both as a player if you wanted to, or for the storyteller. Obviously he's a pretty interesting unexplored NPC you can go with. Another aspect that's kind of cool about the New World of Darkness is that in most cases there is no definitive answer to things. It's usually left pretty vague, and multiple possibilities could be potential options to go with. There's not really one right answer or one true history. So the way that Midnight Circus is actually written, it plays very well into that style of a sort of open sandbox toolbox approach.
Yeah. I think for me the Midnight Circus is probably better suited to the New World of Darkness for some of the reasons that you just pointed out. The ease with which that iteration of the World of Darkness handles crossovers is great. The rules that are given in Midnight Circus are pretty much the crossover rules that are prevalent in second edition World of Darkness, where they're basically based around fairly gross levels of comparing disciplines to gifts and what have you. I'd much prefer using the revised system where it's based on some kind of success levels. But in the New World of Darkness, you don't have that issue at all to begin with. Looking at it in more detail, I would really draw a lot of inspiration from some of the more recent New World of Darkness books, specifically the God Machine Chronicles. We've touched on that a couple of times already in the show today. One of the things that you have in Midnight Circus is how it uses these little secret pathways to move between various realms. So I would run with it as having a connection to the God Machine in some way. As you say, there's no definitive answer, but if you go back into the early days of the circus, you can see easy ways there that you can tie this into some manifestation of an error or a glitch in the God Machine that somebody has figured out how to take advantage of and manipulate. So instead of using trods and spirit errors and moving between realms, what this thing is doing is using broken bits of the God Machine to move around. It's quite literally getting under the wiring and traveling, behind the circuit board in order to reappear in one place and the other. And this exposes the circus as a whole to error, to glitch, and to corruption. And this allows you then to recast the snares and barbs as issues of the God Machine itself, becoming aware of your character and finding ways to draw your character into servitude to the circus itself. To look at a couple of the actual game lines, I think with Demon, the Descent, you could have demon characters using the circus as a cover for their mundane activities. So they're using it in order to hide from the God Machine, taking advantage of the fact that the circus is something that slips between the cracks, and they use that to evade the notice of the higher authorities. Looking at Mage the Awakening, it just leapt out from the page to me, the circus as an abyssal intrusion. If you look at something like Encounters with the Abyss, the Intruders book for Mage the Awakening, it is filled with the kinds of phenomena that you could just drop into the Midnight Circus and they would be completely at home. Strange, warped manifestations of things that should not be. They could make the backstories to any number of sideshows here. And the fact that the Abyss is something that corrupts the minds and personalities and souls of people who encounter it ties very nicely into the circus itself, I think.
I agree. I think Changing the Lost also might be so much better to use the Midnight Circus with than Changing the Dreaming. If you consider that perhaps the Infernal Triad are actually true fae.
The Gentry, yeah.
Kind of going off the God Machine, what if the circus, what if the origin of the circus is actually, like you said, kind of a glitch? Instead of what normally happens, the angel or angels that were supposed to fall never actually fell. They remained angels, but somehow gained some kind of deeper understanding of the totality of the God Machine. And the Midnight Circus is actually their attempt to create their own version of a new God Machine. Yeah,
definitely. And on a similar level, again to riff on Mage the Awakening, the idea of Atlantis being a kind of touchstone for elements of reality that have been edited out of existence that no longer ever existed. I like the idea of the original rites of the circus, specifically Kara, as perhaps being some tiny lost nugget of Atlantean lore. That there was this way for regular folk to both interact with and be protected from the supernatural world at a time when the laws of the universe were different. And rather than it being a lost and lonely spirit, as it is in the Old World of Darkness version, in fact, Kara is a remnant of something from the Atlantean timeline, from the pre-rewritten version of the universe. And you'd kind of look at something like Secrets of the Ruined Temple for this, where you have bits of this previous timeline still embedded in our own. And this also gives you a new reason as to why the other members of the Infernal Trinity are trying so hard to keep this element under wraps, because not only do they not want people to undo their control, but if this true nugget of ancient lore gets out into the open world, not only is it going to undo the circus, but it actually could wreak kind of irrevocable harm upon the world itself. So then that allows you to recast the Infernal Trinity as actually misguided benefactors. They're doing this, not out of the goodness of their heart, but they have stumbled into something, perhaps out of a desire for personal power, or perhaps they were snared by the circus itself. And once they've become part of the inner circle, they realize, oh my God, what am I actually part of here? I can't step away. Much as I want to step away from this thing, I have to stick this out. I have to continue the circus. This thing must endure, because if it doesn't, all that horrendous Kara lore is going to get out into the real world and start re-editing things. And to take a further look down that kind of avenue, the Prince of 100,000 Leaves from the Boston book from Age of the Awakening is quite literally an alien timeline trying to get in and rewrite our own. So you could recast Kara in that vein as well. So the circus then becomes this hideous, corrupted and corrupting element that draws people in and devours them and crushes their souls, and renders them into so much esoteric soup. But it has to happen, because if it doesn't, the thing that it's holding back is going to get out and make things so much worse.
Yeah, kind of a Cthulhu twist on that.
Right. Yeah. The thing that should not be, and we all have to, let the Goral and the Black Spiral dancers have their way, because if it doesn't, something much worse is going to happen. Something
that's kind of interesting you could also do, same with the original World of Darkness, you could actually use the Midnight Circus in each of the individual game lines if you wanted. It'd make a really, really good sort of a group concept for Prometheans, because they constantly have to travel. They can't stay in one place too long. And it also explains, because we didn't really cover it too much, but the circus has this draining effect, both spiritually and physically, on the land that it stays in.
Right, so that ties into the Promethean wasting really nicely.
You kind of covered Mage a little bit already. This could also be a sort of traveling troupe of Geists, maybe something in the carnival. So anytime somebody in the area of the carnival dies, their spirit is kind of trapped in some kind of weird, maybe it has its own Lands of the Dead or its own kind of realm from Book of the Dead. And maybe the Geists are attached to the carnival because they need to interact with and send the ghosts off to where they need to be or fix them. If too many ghosts being attached to the carnival, if too many of them build up, maybe something happens and they need to make sure they kind of mitigate that, keeping the ones around that need to be there and then sending the others away. However, if they're angry and malevolent, they may have to fight them off, and if they're just lost, maybe they have to escort them to the true path.
Yeah, well, the whole crew element is front and center in Geist, so I think that's a pretty easy match. And just touching briefly again on what you said about Promethean, I mean, the book has Husk, but he was created by one of the characters in the circus, so that would be a good way to have a good hook for your Promethean Chronicle, that you start off where all the Prometheans are actually entities who were made in the circus, and they travel around with it, and as part of their personal journey toward humanity, getting away from the circus is something that they need to do. But by the same token, the circus is home to them, and it protects them and it nurtures them. So you could have a really quite a poignant story of getting yourself free from this almost abusive home that you're part of in order to find who you really are. But in the same time, you're leaving safety behind. This one thing that is so horrendous to be part of is actually also the one thing that is keeping you safe and allowing you to travel around the place with some degree of anonymity.
Another kind of interesting take I just thought of, this could actually be a really interesting kind of finale for an individual Promethean, at least, with Tusk. Maybe they're on the last kind of step to regaining their humanity, and the last thing that they need to do is find Husk, who is not complete yet, and pass on that sacred fire to him before they themselves can become mortal.
That's nice, and that would force them to go into this place that's, that is, as we mentioned earlier on, is really a place that you don't really want to go. And just, as I mentioned before, we haven't had a very close look at second edition of Werewolf the Forsaken, but one of the things that was very strong in its early iterations was the aspect that the Aratha are policing the barriers between the mortal and the spiritual world. So having the circus like this come to town is going to wreak all sorts of havoc in Twilight and all sorts of havoc in the spirit world. So this gives Werewolf's characters an immediate hook to get themselves stuck in and start putting things to rights.
Or it could also be something that perhaps for whatever reason, all the spirits they can't deal with, they're too strong or they're too prevalent, they just can't get rid of them. Maybe the circus is something they can kind of pawn the spirits off to.
Right, yes, sell them to Cavendish. Yeah, nice.
So you've already kind of talked about Mage a little. We kind of covered Changeling as well. It could be, secondarily, for Changeling, it could be some kind of mobile goblin market if you change the flavor a little bit. Or kind of similar to Wraith, it could possibly be like a way station inside the hedge, something like a last ditch effort. If one of the characters is just getting too far lost, they could come across this place as like, okay, this is your last chance before your character, becomes non-playable.
Yeah. I think we haven't touched on Requiem, and I think of the various games, at least in what the characters do, Vampire the Requiem is closest still probably to Vampire the Masquerade. But one thing that second edition Requiem has raised the profile of is the Strix. So, for example, replacing Apophis or replacing the Defiler Worm with the activities of the Strix gives you a way to involve your Requiem characters on a level that's much more personally threatening than the Carnival currently probably is.
That's interesting. It didn't even dawn on me. But yeah, that's definitely one way you could go with Requiem. You could also, if the characters are members of the circus, you could really play up the idea of how, because they travel from place to place all across the globe. You could play up the idea that each time that they go to a new location, depending on who holds power in that place, they need to either augment their show or and make sure that they get permission to enter before they actually go into that domain. So the political side of that could be pretty interesting. I don't know how long it would go, but along the way, because they would be forced to interact with, on a personal level, all of the different clans and bloodlines, but also the different covenants. How are they going to present themselves if they're going into a domain that's controlled by the Invictus versus the, Lenke Sanctum? What sort of trade are they going to have to make if they want to go into an area that's controlled by the Order Dracul?
Right, and what is the circle of the crone going to make of the fortune tellers, for example?
Yeah,
that'd be nice.
It's something that they they highlighted a little bit in the book in regards to how the vampires react between going to a Camarilla city and a Sabbat. But in Requiem, there's at least 5 different groups that they need to kind of tailor their demeanor and their show towards. Yeah,
absolutely. I think one thing that's easy, whether it's Old World of Darkness or new, is running it as a Mortals game. And I think you wouldn't have to change, some of the stuff we mentioned earlier on about, Adrian, you mentioned like the Inquisition, and I touched on the Halls of the Arcanum and oh God, my brain's just gone dead.
Project Twilight.
Sorry, thank you. I had mentioned Halls of the Arcanum and Project Twilight. With Hunter the Vigil, for example, you have any number of aspects in that game that you can tailor in the same way. And if you're running Blue Book games from just the core World of Darkness kind of books, you wouldn't have to change things in any great way to allow yourself to take advantage of the same setting elements there, the history, the newspaper clippings, the forgotten lore, etc., etc. That's easily applicable, I think, to both iterations of the World of Darkness.
There's something kind of unique to the New World of Darkness that I just thought of that could be really, really, really interesting. New World of Darkness Innocence.
Oh, yes, right. Yeah, well, that ties directly in with Something Wicked This Way Comes, because, the protagonists of that story are children who are lured into this horrendous circus environment. Yeah, that'd be great.
That, and also the way that you can present all the different horrors in the circus would be a little bit different. You're explaining it to a child, so what do they may not know what like mockery one individual is making in their show. They just see the actual horror from a child's perspective.
One thing I didn't mention earlier on was certainly if you're looking at the true face of the circus is the tub of flesh character. His aspect in the dreaming is he's like 3 stories tall as opposed to his normal height. I want to find a way to get that in there somehow. I'm not quite sure how, but the child being able to see the spiritual face of this already physically monstrous being would it's a scene worth doing, I think. Is any of that kind of sparking ideas for you?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, like I said, I've got a cursory overview of the New World of Darkness. I'm moderately familiar with the core books for the first edition, at least, of most of the games. And really, everything that you've said here so far, I think, is really sound fodder that shows that the transferability of this book is the value, that we have managed to come up with a way that not only can this book be applied to both classic and New World of Darkness, but we've also shown how it can actually apply to every single game line in both of them. So its versatility alone is reason to pick it up and at least peruse it. And I think on that note, we're going to start to draw the episode to a close. If you'd like to contact us at Darker Days Radio, well, we have a Gmail address first of all, and that address mark is
darkerdaysradio@gmail.com.
Excellent. It's good to have you back. Also, you can drop by the Facebook community and also Darker Days Radio on G+. You'll find links to all of those in the show notes, as well as links to some of the products that we've discussed this evening. So it's been an epic trip through crossovers and across the Midnight Circus, but I hope that you've stuck with us, listeners, and that you have managed to get some brilliant ideas for your own chronicles. As I mentioned before, if you have got any ideas on how to make crossovers work, whether they be for the old or for the New World of Darkness, or if you've got any particularly interesting crossover stories, you can certainly drop us a line or visit the G+ community or the Facebook site. But without further ado, I think that it is time for the Midnight Circus to draw in the net of glamour and to vanish without trace until it pops up somewhere unexpected, maybe next month. This is Adrian signing off.
And this is Darker Days Beckett saying good evening.
And this is Mark. Take it easy, guys.